This is David Rehagen with ThinkGeo, and today we're going to take a look at the Map Suite printing system. And I wanted to take this chance to show you the sample that we've published, walk through the code, and show you how you can add printing to your existing system. The first thing is that we built this as kind of a toolbox of classes that you can use for printing. And even though the sample that I'm using is in the Map Suite Desktop Edition, we're also going to have a sample out for WPF, and you can use these different layers in the web edition and in other different editions of our products. I guess the first thing to kind of talk about is that there's multiple ways that you can use this. There's a whole set of APIs in the background that you can use to automate tasks such as putting reports together and sending output to the printer. And then there's some UI things that I'm going to show you that allow you to do WYSIWYG operations, report building, etc. So let's take a look at some of the functionality. This is the sample, and we can move around. This represents the page that we're going to be printing. We have things like labels. We can move around. We can do other things like resize them, and I'll resize the text. But we can do the same thing with other elements on the report. So here's the actual map itself. We can drag it on or off the page, resize it, etc. Other elements include a scale bar, as we have down here, a north arrow, which is set up as an image, and the data grid area at the bottom. So just taking a look at this, there's a couple things that make this unique as opposed to just this being just a map. You can zoom in and zoom out, and as you do, you can see that everything scales. So all these different items scale, including the map. You can see over here the percentage of scale. We can also modify things such as the orientation. And so here you could actually go through and reorganize your map. We can also take a look at different paper sizes. These are just some of the paper sizes that we have in the sample, but you can run wild and do all kinds of paper sizes. Really, it's whatever your printer can support on the back end. We could do something like ANSI D, which is a really huge page, and then if we wanted to do something like that, we'd want a really large title, potentially. Of course, that wouldn't look good for a smaller page. So let's actually go back. Some other things that you can do is that we have implemented just in the sample some very simple dialogues that show you how you can change some of the properties of the various mapping elements. So here I'm going to right click and go to Properties. It brings up this little dialog. The dialog is included in the source of the project, so I can change, I could change this to 60 million. Of course, it reflects the change. There are other things that we can do as well. You saw as we resized it, it actually resized the font size. We can also go to wrap text mode, and in this one we don't play around with the font size, but we wrap the text. And so this is great if you have an area where you have some instructions and there might be 30, 50 words in there. You can have them automatically word wrap. And all of these different properties or text boxes and checkboxes reflect different properties on the underlying object itself. We can also change the resize modes to be able to be reshaped. That means it can change in width or height to where we maintain the aspect ratio or fixed. So in this particular case, we'll do fixed, and we can't resize it. We can also go in here and say whether or not it's draggable. So it is very possible for you to create a report and allow the user to preview it, but not actually move the positions or change anything about the report, just to take a look at it. We can also change the font, the sizes. This is just using the standard .NET dialog. Of course, you can put in here whatever you'd like. We'll go with something really kind of crazy. So we can do stuff like that. Another aspect of it is that we take a cached image of the map and display it. And the reason that we don't have the live map in here is that depending on how complex the map is, it can take a lot of time to actually redraw this on the fly, and we thought that at this moment the actual layout was more important than seeing the map redraw on every little bit. But at the same time, the map is live in a sense that we can do things like we can zoom in to the map. We can allow the user to pan around. You have a lot of control to either have a fixed area or maybe give some control to allow the users to kind of tune the area that they chose once they see it in the layout. So that's actually pretty cool that you don't see in a lot of other printing systems, is the ability to control the map. And what we're looking to do in the future is allow you to actually pan the map and work with the map, do track zooms and things inside the map area. So it's going to be pretty exciting when we get that in. And then of course we can output the map, or export the map, I guess you could say, to various different devices. So one would be just a simple bitmap. This is the bitmap. Another one would be to the print preview, and this is actually the .NET print preview. So this is exactly what would go out to the printer. We can go to PDF using our PDF system. And a couple things to notice about the PDF is that this is a vector PDF. So what's nice about that is it's not an image that we just create and send out. So if you do things like a marquee zoom, so you'll notice that the fonts are all vector and that the lines are vector. So what that really tells you is that you're able to go to a plotter device or something really large and print these maps, and they're going to look really great because they're not being converted into bitmaps to start with. And there we go for the Adobe Reader updates. You try to shut everything down and you just can't. Alright, so that's all vector. That looks really good. And we have plotters here that we've printed out extremely large maps to, and it looks really good. And we can also go out to the printer, which wouldn't be of very much value here on the video, but you can output it directly to the printer, and we're using the .NET printing library to just send everything over there. So, kind of under the covers, what is this? So basically what we're doing is that this area that I'm drawing on the boundary here, this is a map suite map control. It's a desktop edition map control, and we are changing the functionality a little bit of it so that it allows us to do this print layout. So every different control that you see here, or every different kind of visual element, is a type of a layer. It's a new type of layer called a printer layer, and the printer layer has properties that are different than what you would normally think of as a layer. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But basically, there's a new base class called printer layer, and we've inherited from that to create different types of layers. So here we have a label layer, here we have a map layer, here we have a data grid layer, we also have a scale bar layer, we have an image layer. And I forgot to show this functionality, but if you want to add an image, you can just come on here and you can add new items. So here, we can bring this down, add it to here, saying there's a butte there. And all of these layers, all these new printer layers get added to a new interactive overlay. If you're dealing with the WPF or the desktop edition, there's a printer interactive overlay, and that's what allows you to drag all these things around. Now, behind the scenes, typically when you set up a map, you set it to feet, meters, or decimal degrees. And in this case, it needs to be set up to either feet or meters, but the unit system that we're using is in point, and so that's 1/96 of an inch. But don't fret, because you don't have to do everything in point. What we've done is that on these different printer layers, we've allowed you to use whatever unit system you want. So if you like to do your layout in inches or in millimeters, you can do all of that. And so we have a pretty robust layout system so that you can programmatically add all of these elements to the page, and it allows you to lay these things out with a minimum amount of code, and it allows you also to make adjustments. So if a paper size is larger, you can write some code to automatically resize the various elements of your map to take advantage of the extra space. Let's see. So now let's take a look at some of the code. And this is the print preview sample. I'm just in the main sample form. A lot of these other forms in here are the little property dialogues. You can take a look at those, reuse them if you want. We really wanted the sample to show a lot of the functionality, even though most of the time as developers you're going to be dealing with kind of the lower level objects and putting those things together. So in the sample, the first thing when we load up the form is we set up a map with a blank page. That's just something very simple. We create a WinForms map. We set the map unit to feet. Now we want to set up the zoom levels because normally you have zoom level 1 to 20 and those are on various scales. We want these scales to match up with kind of zoom percentages like 20%, 30%, 40%. And so we created a printer zoom level set that allows you to do that. So we're going to create that. We're going to pass in the map unit that you set your map to, and then we've got a little helper function that allows us to get the geographic unit to point unit ratio. It's going to help us do all that stuff. The important part is that you just set the zoom level to the new printer zoom level set. We set the background here to light gray, and so that's what gives us this light gray color. Let's see once this thing comes up. That's what gives us this light gray color, and then we're going to put a new layer on top, which is going to be the page that kind of represents the page boundary. And you're going to see that in just a second. We create the printer interactive overlay, and so remember, interactive overlays are things that where you want to interact with the map, whether it's drawing the current extent or it's editing. So this is one of those kind of interactive ones. You'll create that. You're going to add it to the WinForm map.interactive overlays collection, and then you're going to want to push it to the bottom. And so pushing it to the bottom means that it's going to get the events from the mouse clicks last in the stack. So that's what's going to allow your track zooming to still work and other things. You want to make sure that it kind of gets things last. If it got things first, then you couldn't pan the map, or there's all kinds of things that wouldn't work. So then we're going to set up the page printer layer, and so this is one of those layers that I talked about that inherited from printer layer. It's called the page printer layer. As part of the constructor, you can pass in a size. Here we have an enumeration that has a few different page sizes, and we also have an orientation. You can also set the page size to custom, and then you can measure it in points and get it to whatever size you'd like. We're going to go ahead and open it, and we're going to add it to the printer overlay.printers layer. So remember, we added that interactive overlay up here, where all of these printer layers that you're going to create that are going to represent elements on the screen, they're going to be added to this printer overlay.printer layers. So that's important. Now, what's interesting about the page printer layer is that really the only thing it represents is just a backdrop to allow you to put other controls on this map control and align them with the bounds of what you expect to be printed on the page. So there's really no magic with this page printer layer other than it's a white background that represents a page. Alright, then we're going to set the current extent, and in this case we get the page printer layer, and we're going to get its position, and we're going to scale that up 10% and get the bounding box, and that's where it's going to start. And we're going to set the minimum scale equal to zoom level 20 scale. So that's going to limit it, so you can't zoom in infinitely. We're going to set some sort of bottom to it. Alright, so once you have the map set up with the blank page, then what we're going to do is we're going to put that title on there. So that was the title that read, population greater than 70 million. And this is really going to show how you position the different printer layers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a label printer layer. It's easy enough. The label printer layer has different properties to control the text. So we're going to set the text population greater than 70. We're going to set the font. We're going to set the font brush. And we're going to set the printer wrap mode to auto size the text. This is where I showed you where it can also wrap. So we're going to set it to auto size in this case. Now this next little bit of code is actually positioning. And so what we wanted to do in this case is that we wanted to position the label so that the center of the label was about a ½ inch from the top, and it was centered on the page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get that page's bounding box. And so we wrote a little helper called get page bounding box, and we can jump to see what that thing does. But basically it just goes into the printer interactive overlay. It grabs the printer interactive overlay, and then it looks for the page printer layer, and it just grabs it by name. And then it calls the page printer layer .get position, and it passes, and we can get the position or basically the bounding box of every element of the layer, and we can get that in whatever unit we want. So this is going to return the position of the page basically as a rectangle, and we just put it in this little helper method so you wouldn't have to see this code, because we get the position of the page's bounding box all the time, because whenever we're laying things out, we usually lay them out relative to the page's bounding box. So let's go back up. Alright, so we have the page's bounding box. That's a rectangle shape. And we're doing all of our stuff in inches now, but you could just as easily pass in millimeters or some other unit. We're going to create a point shape that's going to represent our label center, and we're going to take the page bounding box dot upper right point x, and we're going to subtract it from the page's bounding box width and divide by 2. And so basically we're gonna get the x is basically centered. And then what we're going to do is for the top, we're going to get the upper left point of the bounding box. So that's measuring how tall it is, and we're going to take off a ½ of a point. And since this is all being measured in inches, we're taking a ½ inch off, and that's going to be that center point that we want to center the label at. So for all of the different printer layers, they all have a position relative to the map. And so in this particular case, we're going to call the label printer layer .set position. Okay, so when we call the set position, we're going to say that we want this label 5 inches wide, we want it 1 inch tall, and we're going to pass the label center, and we're saying that all of these units that I've been using, this 5 and this 1, are all in inches. And so basically that's going to set that position for it. Now if we actually wanted to get its position back, we could say label printer layer, or label we could say get position, and if we called this overload without passing any parameters, it's going to give us to it in points, or we could specify what we wanted it in. And so it looks like it's printing unit. And then centimeters, inches, meters, millimeters, or points, and then we can get that bounding box back there. So here we've created the label and we've positioned it on the page. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call back that printer interactive overlay, because we need to add this new printer layer to it. And we're going to add the printer layer and call it label layer. So that code basically sets up and positions this label here. Now of course once we start dragging it around, the position is going to change. But if the user drags it over here, and then behind the scenes we call the label printer layer's position, we're going to get the position of this bounding box. So as we change it, as we drag it around, all the properties are changing on the object in the background. Alright, so the next part is that we add the map layer. So the map layer is fairly simple. It works almost as the label layer did. We create the map printer layer. Just remember everything has printer layer on it because they all inherit from that. The map printer layer has a map extent. As you can see here, this is in decimal degrees. It can be, it's whatever the unit of the map data is. Here we're setting a background mask. All the different printer layers have a background mask, and you can use the background mask either to give some sort of background to the item itself. So for example, I could use the background mask on the label printer layer, so I could shade this in, or I can use it to draw a boundary around it. So in this particular case, it's actually that mask. I'm just using a pen, and that's what gives me this nice border around the map. So here I'm creating the new style. I'm using the pen. And then in this particular case, we want to basically position the map so it's kind of in the center, and we want it 8 inches wide and 7 inches tall, but we want it justified up just a little bit. And so here we call the set position. We say we want it 8 inches wide, 7 inches tall. We get the page's bounding box, and we basically we add an inch to it as far as its let's see, vertical or horizontal alignment. It's vertical alignment. We add an inch to that, and that's what places it on the map. And then really the rest of this code is just actually loading the layers. So in this particular case, we create a shapefile feature layer as we just normally would. We set its zoom levels, and this one we happen to have a class break. We have some styles. We get everything set up. We have a text style. And the important part is that here on the map printer layer, it has a layers collection, and we add the layers that we want to draw on the map. So if you had 10 different layers that represented the map, you would load all those 10 layers into the map printer layer.layers collection. And then of course we're going to add the map printer layer to the printer interactive overlay. Now let's imagine in a case where you're not in the desktop edition, and let's say you're in the web, or you have a process that just needs to spit maps reports out. Then in that particular case, you could just create all of these printer layers. You don't have to put them onto the printer interactive overlay. And then you'll see when we get to the actual printing part, you would just create all of these layers and then run through this exact same printing code, and you'll get the finished product out of it. So it's very versatile. You don't have to have the WYSIWYG drag everything around to still get a lot of the functionality for laying out your reports and then ultimately printing them. And then here we just have a little code that's actually to help us debug potential problems with customers, where we want to make sure that the scale bar that's on the screen matches up with the scale bar that's on the map, or with the scale that's actually on the map. You can just ignore that. The next part is we're just going to add another couple different types of layers. So we're going to add the data grid, we're going to add the logo, we're going to add the scale line. Those are all pretty straightforward. We're also going to set up the combo boxes. So the combo boxes are these guys. Let's see, as soon as they come up, are these guys over here, so that it has the percentages in them. You can zoom in, say to 100%, or do the portrait or landscape. And whenever you're modifying these, like the paper size or the orientation, it's just simply changing the page printer layer and making it larger or smaller. And then one other thing too is that since all of these are different printer layers, when I go through and I right click and I go to the properties, then what these properties dialogues are doing is they're getting the data grid printer layer, and it's just modifying different properties on it. So we just happen to put together this dialog, but it's just reflecting the underlying data grid printer layer. So we could go through here and we could say Germany and add a little exclamation point, and then once we've changed the data, of course we get that reflected in here as well. And the data grid is driven off of just a data table. So whatever the data table has, you put that into the data grid, and it'll create a grid for you. The other thing that's interesting about the scale line, so actually we can run it just a little effect, is that the scale is tied to the map, and so as we move around, this will change in real time as well. So here let's zoom in a little bit, and what you're going to see is that that's going to reflect the changes as we zoom in. So this stays accurate to that. So that's the basic elements of adding things there. Now let's talk about the output, so how these things get printed. So here I have them grouped as export buttons, and we'll take a look at the first one, which is actually in the form, it's actually the export to bitmap. And most of the code in these are relatively the same. You're going to see this theme kind of occur, and basically we're going to get the printer interactive overlay. We're going to grab the page layer, because the page layer is going to represent our bounds that we're going to use to print. We're going to create a bitmap here. We're going to get the page printer layer's bounding box, and since if you don't actually specify a unit, it's going to come back in points, and points are 1/96 of an inch, which matches up really well with a bitmap being every pixel being 1/96, so it maps over well, so we can just use directly the height and the width. We're going to create a GDI plus Geo canvas, and that's actually going to do the drawing on the bitmap. We're going to call the GDI plus Geo canvas.begin draw. We're going to pass in the bitmap. We're going to pass in the page layer's bounding box and the map unit, and then we're going to loop through all of the different printer layers inside of the printer interactive overlay.printer layers collection. So as you've been creating these printer layers, you've been putting them in there. Now we're going to loop through them, and we're going to set on the printer layer that drawing is equal to true. And what this basically does is that it suppresses the layer from drawing any control points or things that we use to resize the controls. And then we just make sure that we don't print the page printer layer, because really the page printer layer is just kind of a holding spot to show you on the screen where to drag your controls, but we don't actually print the page layer itself. And then we say printer layer.draw. We pass in the geo canvas, and we pass in this labels in all layers, which we created up here. This is just to capture labels, so that if you have collisions, that if you don't want collisions in layers, if you don't want collisions in labels across layers, then you need this collection. So we put it in here. Then as soon as we're done drawing, we set the printer layer is drawing to false. We call the end drawing on the GDI plus Geo canvas. That wraps everything up, and then basically we save the bitmap. So that's it. So most of the code is actually in getting the bitmap set up. Then really you just loop through these printer layers and print them. And if we go ahead and look at the next one is print preview. It's almost the same thing. We grab our printer interactive overlay and our page printer layer. This print dialog and print document, these are .NET printing objects, so those aren't ours. We set it to landscape, and then we look at the orientation and we decide to go to portrait or change it. We set the printer document default page size here, and we get print preview page size. That's just a little helper method that converts our page sizes into the .NET printing system page sizes. Then we create our printer geo canvas. That's something that ships with Map Suite that allows you to to print maps directly to the printer. We set the drawing area, a couple different things, and then we do the loop just like we did before. We flush it. We call the .NET print preview dialog, and then it pops up the dialog directly here. We also export to PDF, and basically it's the same thing. We create a PDF document, we add a page, set the orientation, set the size, and then it's the same loop. We go through and then we save it out and we pop up the PDF with this process start. And then if we were to go directly to the printer, it's the same thing. We create a print document, we create our printer geo canvas, we loop to the layers and export them. So you can see that it's really not that much code to have a WYSIWYG printing system where all the printing stuff is out in vector, and it's great because you can use the WYSIWYG, or you can do things behind the scenes if you had some sort of service that needed to create maps where really there was no output. I mean, user didn't need to verify it. You can also do things where you could have the user look at it, but you could lock the report down so they couldn't change anything, they can only view it. So there's a lot of tools in the toolbox we feel for this. Now, this is actually in the daily builds as of today, so you can take a look at it, play around with it, but we're definitely not done with it. So there's a number of different features that we're going to be adding. I mean, of course, we're going to be fixing bugs on it. I'm sure as people do more advanced scenarios, we're going to find bugs. We also want to add a couple other items to it, just off the top of my head. The first one is a layout ruler. So we'll have a ruler here on the side, and you can set the units to inches or whatever. So it's just going to help you, get an idea, especially when you're on these larger paper size, when you're visually looking at it, how big is an inch, how big is a centimeter, or what have you. We're also going to add some snapping in, so that if you're moving things around, you can have them snap to other things, or do some alignment. So if you set this, let's say to this particular width, and then you're resizing this, will allow it to kind of snap and give you some feedback when you've reached this area. And also have maybe like a little grid, so you can line things up on a grid, because right now you can literally do it to kind of an infinite resolution, and sometimes it's really nice to have things really lined up well. We're also going to be looking at just more advanced layout controls. Right now to move something around, you have to click on this little kind of grabby thing to move it around. You can't just click anywhere, that pans it. But if you look at a lot of other layout programs, typically what happens is if you click and you drag something, it actually moves the thing. It doesn't actually move the canvas. And if you wanted to move the canvas, you would hold down the space bar and you would move it. So those are some things that we want to do. We also want to have some alignment things where you can multi-select different items and then say align left, align right, or center in a particular spot. We'd also like to add panels, so that if you wanted to put 2 or 3 things in a panel, you could do that. And of course, we're looking for feedback. So if there's anything you guys want out there, just let us know. Get in the forums and get your requests in. So thanks a lot, and I appreciate your attention, and have a great day.